our goal really is to learn more about ESG goals and work toward executing on those ESG goals, specifically as they relate to water in the food and beverage industry. And we've got an amazing panel of folks who are experts in this space who have been willing to share their time and talk to us about what they're working toward in their companies and or previous companies and organizations that they're supporting now. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the panelists. I'm going to read just a quick bio of everybody that's agreed to join us. Thank you guys for taking your time today to talk to us. Joining me today, my name is Oriana Bretschger. I'm the CEO and founder of Aquacycl. We're hosting this panel today. Thank you all for being here. We've got 82 participants on the line so far. First and foremost, joined by Rajendra Grisahane, also goes by Guru. Guru is the VP of Engineering at PepsiCo North America, supporting 65 factories across USA and Canada. Guru is directly responsible for the execution of initiatives that support manufacturing, operations like capacity, capability, infrastructure, innovation, and resource conservation. Thank you, Guru, for being here. Also with us, we have Andy Batches. Andy is the Director of Environmental Health and Safety for Brown-Forman Corporation, and he leads the environmental health and safety compliance across global production operations. Andy is also with the Global Environmental Sustainability Team, translating strategy and targets into site-level actions. Welcome, Andy. We also have Paul Bowen with us. Paul is former water and sustainability executive at the Coca-Cola Company and a past president of the Water Environment Federation. Thanks for being here, Paul. And next, we've got Michael Alexander. Michael is the global head of Water, Environment, Agriculture, Sustainability at Diageo. His principal responsibility is to drive the company's environmental strategy, associated policies, communications, stakeholder engagement, with a focus on water stewardship and agricultural supply chains. Thanks for joining us today, Michael. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Eric Willman. Eric is the Senior Director of R&D, Water Processing and Technology at PepsiCo, and is responsible for identifying, piloting, promising water technologies that drive innovation, productivity, and sustainability in PepsiCo's food and beverage operations. So we got a powerhouse panel today. Thank you guys again. So want to kick it off. We only have an hour. We got 5 wonderful people here to share their opinions. And so we're going to start off with really just wanting to hear from you specifically about some of the critical pain points that you all are facing or have faced, or 1 or 2 sustainability goals that your company is trying to accomplish specifically as it relates to water management plan. So this is really to everybody, especially those who are currently working with corporations. So 1 or 2 pain points in water and or 1 or 2 sustainability goals that are top priority for you right now. I'm going to kick that off to Michael Alexander to start us.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you very much for having me on today's session.
Oh no.
I'm gonna focus on water. I think the challenges we've got. So that's I won't try and cover everything from sustainable packaging to waste to landfill to human rights to diversity inclusion to responsible drinking. So there's a whole plethora of targets that we, just similar to many other companies, have across our whole of ESG agenda, which is super important. But if we concentrate on water and water stewardship in particular, then we have kind of 4 buckets in our water strategy. We have water in our supply chain, ag water. I'll come to that in a second. We have water in our operations, water reuse, recycling, water efficiency, water discharge. We have water in our community. We have a water replenishment program and collective action program in water stressed markets. And we have global water advocacy, membership of AWS, Alliance for Water Stewardship, the CEO Water Mandate, the Beverage Industry Environment Roundtable, all about global advocacy. So that's just the setting the scene very, very quickly. If I was to pick out a couple of pain points on water stewardship in particular, I would pick out probably collective action. We can't do it alone. We need to prioritize working with others. I think the big challenge there is that We're trying to work in basins because water is very locationally, contextually important. And working in basins is difficult because everybody works in slightly different basins. A kind of major basin approach to it is difficult because you're not necessarily mitigating your own direct water risk by being part of a collective action that is looking at the major basin, because there's so many different dimensions to the water risk and climate risk associated with that. So I really think that that is one of our biggest challenges, is for us all to work together better. We've been talking about it a long time, and there are big initiatives. There's some great initiatives out there in terms of both the Water Resilience Coalition, but also NGOs like the WWF and TNC that are bringing people together to work together more. And we do need those facilitators, if you like, to bring people together. But it's really difficult for companies to get outside their comfort zone of not controlling stuff, not necessarily directly related to their operations, and trying to really engage in collective action. And the second bit is the pain point is agriculture, water and agriculture, particularly blue water, irrigated water and agriculture, and particularly with smallholder farmers in some of the more, what they call the global south, I suppose, where it's very, very difficult to understand how we can make our smallholder farmers in terms of water more climate resilient. And that's a real kind of climate adaptation challenge that we have in our agricultural supply chains for those that are operating in the global south, where climate risk is the greatest and adaptation is the biggest priority. So that's not something we can cover in a very quick conversation now, but those would be the two pain points that I think I'd pick out, is the collective action required and the kind of particular focus on agriculture and those vulnerable communities in the global south. So hopefully that's enough to think about.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. From the bottling side, Eric, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So yeah, I'll focus on water too, as that's what I do for PepsiCo. So we've recently announced that we're going to be net water positive by the year 2030. And so a big part of being net water positive is shrinking the footprint of our direct operations water usage, the fresh water usage. And PepsiCo, has operations in both beverage manufacturing and snacks manufacturing. So we have some aggressive goals, in line with the beer. Some of the panelists are a member of beer, to bring our plants down to best-in-class water use efficiency when they're in high water risk areas. And then the water that we can't shrink, after we've shrunk it to best in class, then we're going to replenish that in these high water risk watersheds. So if you do the math, that's about 11 billion liters of water in our company-owned facilities alone that we have to eliminate from use. So it's a daunting challenge. And so as a water technologist, it's both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity in the sense that it's kind of exciting to figure out the most efficient ways to shrink your water footprint in the food and beverage industry.
Thank you, Eric. Andy, what's your perspective on critical pain and or sustainability goals for Brown-Forman?
Yeah, thanks, Oriana. Certainly, as Michael noted, local context is everything when we're talking about water. And so helping understand what are the conditions of those watersheds where we have our facilities is super critical. And unfortunately, that is a fairly significant pain point in certain areas, is that the data is either not available or not of high enough quality or not at the specificity that is needed to really, pinpoint what are the actual challenges on the ground that maybe we need to be working with others on. So, certainly data is a big piece of that. That's one of our pain points. On the flip side, I know Michael also mentioned governance, but policy becomes really critical in this conversation too. Whether it's that there is no policy or a lack of governance in a local area, or that the existing policies or regulations require something that maybe doesn't fit anymore or is counter to something that you're trying to do, like water reuse. So, as a company, if you've got multiple locations, you're trying to navigate multiple different watershed basins where the context is different. So the requirements are different, the local regulatory schemes are different, data quality and clarity is different. That all comes together to become a pretty significant challenge, and it is only going to be by working across industries, across different groups within watersheds, so with the community, with local governments, with NGOs, that we're going to be able to achieve those successes that we're all trying to make. I mean, we all understand that water is a human right, and it's something that every person needs, and we have to make sure that when we're operating in those areas that we're respecting that. And so how do we do our part in making sure that that watershed is sustainable?
Terrific. Thank you for that. And all of you touched a little bit on the reuse aspect of it, and looking at a greater direction into water reuse, right, to alleviate stress on extraction and basins, et cetera. I guess, can you all comment a bit about what you've seen work and not work from a reuse capacity? And that could be from an organizational perspective or a specific project that you may want to comment on. Where does water reuse and recycling really fit within the organization, or within this umbrella of preservation? And I'm gonna let Paul kick that one off from his experience with Coca-Cola and perhaps others.
Yeah, thanks, Oriana. This, first of all, there's some very interesting comments so far. I think if you put us all in separate rooms and ask us to list, where we were working, Michael very elegantly laid out kind of the 4 buckets at the beginning. And I think we're all kind of working in those same buckets, which I think is a tribute to the companies. And I think it's a tribute to going back that we've all been working together as well. This is not just Diageo doing their thing and Brown-Forman doing their thing and Pepsi and Coke doing their separate things. I mean, we have collaborated for 15 years in this space trying to work together. And I think that shows in the fact that we're all talking about some of the same things and we're all using some of the same terms and same words. Reuse is always a daunting challenge. I think Andy kind of touched on it a bit with policy, and how do you get around some of the local policies and local cultural issues surrounding reuse. So for my experience with Coke and dealing with reuse, the easiest reuse was what we could do inside the building. Could we reuse from point A to point B, take a lower quality of water and use it to rinse, or something that was maybe we could return of water to the front of the plant as opposed to having it go down the drain. So that type of internal reuse where we could significantly, in many cases, drop water use by 20-25% just by internal reuse, a simple piping changes or a filter, some very minimal treatment. Those were the most effective and the easiest ones to overcome. The more difficult ones became when we had to reuse water that made it to the end of the pipe. And how could we do those? Could we reuse those for irrigation, on-site uses, anything external to the facility? Maybe it was truck washes, maybe it was external crate washes or cooling towers. Once you brought it back inside the building, that's where the cultural issues, the policy issues, the legal issues developed.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and you touched on it, right? Those are some of the easy things that you can do, right, when it's inside the building. So once the low-hanging fruit has already been harvested, then what's the next step? And I guess, where do you see the biggest need? And I know that's going to be different locally, likely, but in terms of being able to optimize reuse and propagate reuse, and what happens next after the easy stuff is done? What are the major challenges that that you all are facing and have to overcome in order to maximize that reuse opportunity? I'm going to kick that over to Guru to start us off.
All right, thank you, Oriana. So, you know what Paul said, I mean, I could almost hear myself speaking, because if you had asked me that question, I would have said exactly the same things. Now, as we start looking at reuse, I think there is definitely, and Paul was right on point, there is a societal factor, what Eric and I talk about, we call it the yuck factor. So there is water that comes out of our processes. You know, it's not bad water, right? We are doing reverse osmosis. We generate brine. We are doing CIP. We generate some process water. This water, if you really put your mind to it, it's not very difficult, and it is a little more expensive, but it's not exorbitantly expensive to be able to extract good quality water from those streams and repurpose it. And we could repurpose it. The ideal place to put it, the non-ideal place to put it is in a cooling tower, in a boiler, in a truck wash, as Paul correctly said. But when you look at the metrics of a large manufacturing operation and you look at how much water goes where, there is only so much water that you can put in the truck wash and in the cooling towers and so on. You are left with surplus water. And the best place to put it is at the front of the plant, where you can reapply the water all over again. So, Paul, completely aligned with what you're saying. And I'm glad I have a partner who's as passionate and who thinks along the same lines as I do. The challenge we run up with is, the marketing challenge. What will people say? The other thing which I think we can do to some extent is, and we don't think about it a lot that way. We tend to keep food industries together. We tend to keep mineral industries together. We tend to keep oil and gas together. We should look at co-locating industries. So my waste could be perfectly good water for somebody else. Like, let's say somebody is, they're in the business of making cement and concrete. The cement and concrete doesn't have to be, RO grade water. My brine could be good enough for him. Or let's say somebody's in the minerals industry, or somebody's, has towers where they're cleaning oil and natural gas. Those waters don't have to be so clean. They're currently using city water today. And why can't they take my water instead? And obviously, trucking water is very expensive. Piping water is also expensive. But if the industries are co-located, at least you have a shot at it. The other pinch point I see, so that is the one about, similar to what Paul said and Michael said before that, right? We need to be more collaborative and look at this thing holistically. The other thing I think we need to change is mindset. So America, and I'm American by choice now. I acquired citizenship, but I originally came from India. And I think as a nation, we are a spoiled nation. Water is cheap, water is plentiful, and therefore nobody cares. And somebody who grew up in India where water was not cheap and not plentiful. I mean, I remember when I was young, when I was 5 and 6 years old, we used to get water for 1 hour in a day. The faucet used to turn on for 1 hour in a day. You filled up the 8 or 9 or 10 buckets, and the family survived on those 10 buckets of water until next morning. And that include everything: bathing, toilet, cooking, cleaning, everything. And when you have that kind of when you grow up with that kind of deficit, then you start to appreciate what is possible. I mean, we were a family of four: my parents, my sister, and I, and we managed on 10 buckets of water a day. And today, people don't think anything. When they are shaving, the tap is on and it's flowing water at full blast while you're shaving. You're not really using the water. So I think a lot has to be done in the mindset, in changing how people view water, and not just at the corporate level, but across the board, everybody. And I think that's an area where we need to focus. And as corporations that have a big voice, we should partner with NGOs, we should partner with government agencies, we should partner with each other, and kind of spread that message as well. I think that pinch point is a big pinch point, and if we can address that, we can do a lot of good.
Thank you so much, Guru. That's great. Um, comments from Diageo, from Brown-Forman relative to reuse, and or ideas about, you know, how better collaboration can occur, and you know, cooperation even outside of industrial practices.
Yeah, I think a lot of, not surprisingly, a lot of sensible suggestions and comments from the other panelists, and I would just agree with much of it. I think we have to be aware of the kind of, I suppose, the total holistic look in terms of environmental impact when we're looking at water reuse. It can use a lot of energy. It can use some chemicals. There's sludge. I'm talking about, you know, significant investment in reuse through reverse osmosis and other mechanisms where we've certainly in the last 3 to 5 years made some significant investments in water stressed areas in water reuse at that scale. But to Paul's point about optimizing that, it's difficult when we're not putting reuse water into product. So I know there's a lot of talk about that in the beer industry in particular, but also in other soft drinks and other industries in terms of what the pros and cons of that, and that's probably the cultural piece that Paul was referring to. But so that is a challenge, but it equally is a challenge to make sure you're looking at it holistically, so we can end up spending a lot of money and a lot of carbon on the energy to run the reuse systems that we've got put in, and really to optimize them in terms of water efficiency. But you might get the very best water efficiency, but it's detrimental to your carbon efficiency, if you like. So I think it is important to that, and I love the point that Guru made about you know, optimizing opportunities to work, co-locate with others. I think that's absolutely the way we should be going, particularly when we're in cities. Some of our breweries and distilleries are very remote and not in that situation, but many are in cities as well, big conurbations where there should be, I suppose, greater infrastructure opportunity to do that water sharing of low quality, poor grade water for one use can be perfectly good water use for another. And I know there are many companies that are looking at opportunities of that. And again, that probably comes back to some of the collective action opportunities, the collaborations, the facilitators, the conveners of those opportunities, when individual companies sometimes just don't have the resources and the contacts and influence to be able to make it happen on their own.
Let me add something to that. And Michael, those are great points. You know, it's the first thing is we have to judge water by its quality, not its history. And that's a favorite saying in the wastewater industry. And that's really, you know, where we need to be focused. And too many people want to say, well, this water was used in this other location, so we can't use it. But the whole idea of co-locating and being able to work with others, we have to involve another sector in that discussion, and that's the local government that's selling water. Because too many times we being Coke, we've located next to somebody, they're perfectly willing to take our wastewater or even our primary treated wastewater for another use. And the local municipality said, oh no, you can't do that. That's our water and you're just temporarily using it. So you have to give it back to us because we want to sell it to this other industry. And so we have to involve the local people in that discussion as we move forward. Otherwise, we run into, again, some of the same barriers that we've been running into.
Well, I would add to that, Paul, that so today we pay a price to buy water. I'm talking about my organization. I'm sure it's true of every organization that's represented here today among the panelists as well as the audience. We pay money to buy water. We pay money to discharge water. So if a municipality says, no, that's my water, I want it, I'm perfectly willing to pay that same money to discharge my water to the other guy. I mean, if it's about, hey, I'm going to lose revenue in the process, okay, I pay, you know, $3 a thousand or $4 a thousand gallons to discharge water to the city POTW. I'm still willing to pay the $4 to give it to my neighbor. And if he is buying it from the city POTW for $5 a gallon, he should say, okay, if I'm getting my water, I don't mind paying the $5 to the city also. So, you know, from a revenue point of view, that can be addressed. I know it's always about the money, but we can make the city whole in terms of revenue and still optimally use the water, because I'm putting it in the drain which is going to the POTW. I don't know what they're doing with it. Maybe they're treating it and they're turning it back around and giving it to my neighbor. So I can give it to my neighbor directly and they can still make the revenue.
So along those lines, I mean, in your experience, have you found any, I guess, incentive programs, or are there, opportunities within local, constraints, I guess, that would incentivize this cross collaboration, right? Whether if it's co-location or buying and selling water from industry to city. Have you experienced that or seen that within your organizations? And if not, what do we need to do as audience members, informed citizens, et cetera, to help see some of these changes occur? Anybody is welcome to jump on that one.
You know, I'm not part of this myself, but some of my colleagues that are involved with the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So it's sort of designed to, and maybe some of the panelists are on that can speak more to it, but it's really a tool to recognize that water is a hyper-local issue. It needs to be managed at the watershed level, and then building on the points of the panelists, you know, one plant's waste could be another plant's source if it's appropriately treated, as Paul said. So it's really a tool to manage the watershed amongst all the stakeholders, whether those are industries, whether those are NGOs, whether those are government types of organizations. So we've piloted it in a number of areas, and we have ambitions to continue to roll out that tool across our water-stressed watersheds.
I think that's an excellent point, Eric, because I think companies like a framework, if you like, and they like a toolkit and a framework to be able to use, and that's exactly the right framework. And we've used it as well, and we've just actually had a group of 11 distilleries in a watershed in the northeast of Scotland certified to the Alliance Water Stewardship Standard. So we find it very useful as a methodical approach to identifying water risks in the catchment, to identify other water users, and it's a rural situation there, so it's not like you can pump water or pipe water to your neighbor and get them to use it. It's not that opportunity there, but there was still huge opportunities from applying that AWS. And if you're in a urban or peri-urban kind of situation, then the AWS is a great framework. You don't have to get certified, but you just use the framework, use the standard itself to understand methodically through a stakeholder analysis and so hydrological analysis as well, to understand where the opportunities might be and where the risks might be, but where the other stakeholders are. And importantly, that framework also demands that you engage with local government, to the earlier points that made about local government. So that framework does demand that you engage with them as the regulator, as the buyer, a seller of water or whatever. So I think it's a really good pointer for other companies that are looking at this that Eric's made in terms of using that framework.
And I think it puts Oriana's first question into context, right? So when we're looking at the last drop at maybe a cement manufacturer or something like that, how meaningful is that when you know that 70% of the water is used in agriculture? You know, if you're operating as a watershed or as you're operating as just a part of a planetary ecosystem, shouldn't we really be focusing on that 70%? I don't know, but those are the discussions that should be happening at a watershed level.
And you know, most times I do believe, at least when it comes to technical matters that are of this level of pressing nature, industries, people such as us on the call should have a free and uninhibited dialogue about what each one is doing, and be not be afraid to share the successes and the failures, because I think when I could learn from you, you could learn from me, somebody could learn from somebody, and it will just accelerate the journey. Unfortunately, I think there are requirements, regulatory, legal. I'm not allowed to talk to Coke because they are my competitor and that kind of thing. I think we should take away some of those barriers in those areas where it's for the overall societal good, and it's not talking about marketing campaigns or product launches and that kind of stuff. This is purely technical. It's purely purely driven towards the sustainability agenda, whether it is water or greenhouse gas or plastic or any such thing.
Yeah, Guru, those are great points, and that was the impetus behind the Beverage Industry Environmental Roundtable was, it was all people like Andy and Mike and I'm sorry, Eric and Michael that really weren't at the marketing level, weren't at the pricing level. They were technical people involved in production and making decisions about where water was going to go and how it was going to go. And really, it's been a great collaborative effort. And I think if you look, if others outside look at the way this group has been structured and the way they've operated, I think it's a model for collaboration among similar industries is the way to move forward. And it started with simply trying to get the metrics the same so that we could talk the same language. And so when beer first started, there were two components. There was a water component and a communications component, and it was get all the metrics aligned and then talk to people with the same language. And again, if you listen to the four groups talk today, you hear some of the same words, the same language, because we've worked together so long on this. And that's really the key, in working in this area, is being able to understand the issues commonly so that we attack them in the same way.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of how you can attack them in the same way, there's been a couple questions that popped up in the chat that I'd love to deliver here, which is KPIs. So how are each of your companies tracking success and or failure against these metrics, which are now commonly understood?
Well, we have I think we made a very simple KPI which is easy to understand and easy for people to track and try and improve upon. So one is a KPI in PepsiCo which we call the water use ratio. It's very simple. It's how much water in the numerator. It is how much water came into your facility. So that's the city water meter. Or that's the numerator. The denominator is how much water left your facility in the form of finished product. So everything that went in a bottle or a can. It's a simple ratio. Now that ratio encompasses everything. If you're washing a truck, if you're CIPing, if you've got an RO brine, if you're evaporating the water because of your cooling towers, everything is encompassed in that. And that is a very simple metric. It's easy to measure, right? If you know how much product left your factory in the form of finished goods, you know exactly how many gallons of liquid left your factory. And you have a city water meter and you have a city water invoice. You know how many gallons of water came into your factory. The ratio is very simple to determine and to track and to weigh ourselves against calibrate how we are doing and so on. So that's one. The second thing we look at is what we call the water room efficiency. So that's a subset of this global water use ratio. And that is when we build water rooms. And I should talk a little bit about what we are doing at PepsiCo, and I'm sure everyone else is doing. We are looking at improving, and we are, more and more we're going towards reverse osmosis systems just because the nature of our product and the shift towards the more sensitive product demands. So we are moving more and more towards reverse osmosis, away from line treatment systems and minimal treatment systems. The water room efficiency is defined somewhat similarly. How many gallons of water come into your water room and how many gallons of beverage grade water leave your water room? Or we do it by difference. We say how much water came into your water room and how much went out in the drain. The difference went into your processing and beverage making. And there was a time when our water room efficiencies for reverse osmosis systems used to be in the mid to low 80s. Today, we with applying recovery technologies, a couple of companies out there, and even working with our vendors and trying to find more and more creative and innovative ways. I've got some factories where we modernized our water rooms, and we are talking the high 90s, 97, 96, 97% water recovery. So 100 gallons of water comes in, 97, 3 goes to the drain, 97 goes onward. And then that 97 is part of that all-encompassing water in, water out as a factory as a whole. So that's one of the KPIs we use, simple to measure, simple to understand, and easy to, we even have contests with, plant to plant contests and so on to see who can show the best improvement. Now, there is a little caveat there. So a lot of it depends on your quality of water coming in, right? If you have poor quality water like a Sacramento, which is filled with silica, you cannot have the same metrics as a good quality water. Maybe in the New York State, we have pretty good quality water. But our contests are based on self-improvement. How did you do versus yourself last year? And then you're talking same quality, same product portfolio, and same everything. A lot of the noise gets out of the picture.
And how often do you communicate those KPIs within the organization? So you have
All the
competitions
time,
all the
all
time.
the time, all the time. We have a whole resource conservation group that is tracking it, reporting it. It goes up, it goes to the plant levels. They go out and measure stuff. They track it, report it up. Definitely, the plants get to know. The leadership at the plant gets to know. It gets percolated down to the operations, and definitely management gets to know. I mean, that one of the most common topics that Eric and I talk about all the time is, hey, this plant is at 1.6, and how can we get it to 1.4? And the other plant is at 1.4, and how can we get it to 1.3, and stuff like that. So we talk about it all the time.
That's great. Thank you. Andy,
I think,
Michael.
so I was just going to say that I think, yeah, we have some similar internal within our own operations, what I might call scope 1 and 2 water metrics, as Guru's outlined. I think it's also important that increasingly companies are looking outside their four walls and developing metrics that try to measure, very difficult to do, try and measure their impact externally. And many companies have adopted this concept of replenishment. And hydrologically, it might not always be absolutely kind of fail safe, but actually what it does, it gives a kind of pro rata volumetric measurement to a site's water use, and therefore its water replenishment. So each of our sites that are located in water stressed areas, of which we have about 45 sites in water stressed areas, each of them has their individual KPI to per annum to replenish X volume of water through a menu of different projects they can use, which are defined in the World Resource Institute volumetric water benefit accounting guideline. So it's not our guideline, it's the same guideline that Coca-Cola uses, that PepsiCo uses, that Heineken uses, that many other food and beverage companies use. So that means it's comparable. So Paul mentioned the point about comparability at the very start in terms of the beverage industry environment roundtable. That's hugely important for our stakeholders, our investors, our employees, NGOs, whoever it might be, our customers. They want comparable data. And therefore, if we're all using the same methodology, just as Guru mentioned, we're all using that methodology. We're also increasingly using that methodology to try and measure how much water we're trying to put back into the catchments that we're extracting water from. So that's a KPI that certainly we measure on a monthly basis and report ad nauseam. As Guru mentioned, it's as important a metric as a water efficiency or a water discharge metric is.
Thank you, Michael. Andy,
Yeah,
how are you?
I'm sorry, Oriana. I just wanted to add one thing. When a lot of us started, we measured this replenishment on a global basis. And we have, I don't want to say matured, we've understood more, whatever you want to say. We're now, I believe all of us are starting to look at the local level, that water is a very local resource. We can't replenish in Europe and count it toward really what happens in Africa. We've got to look at those local levels. And I think that has been one of the biggest shifts in our thinking as we have moved forward in our journey to be more water neutral, is looking at how can we replenish, how can we return more water at the local level, the local context. And so I don't think we're going to see as much massive global projects and more localized projects. The efforts tend to be now focused on where water is scarce as opposed to global.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I think I'd like to tie a couple of the threads together. Again, most of us are measuring how much water we use, how much goes out in products, what are the efficiencies, year-over-year improvement. But I think one of the things that you asked is what can companies do? And that truly is, if you've got an industry association, make sure that you are talking about these things. Common industries ought to be benchmarking against each other. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, from the work that beer has done over the years of establishing those standard metrics is now I can lay out in front of each of our site teams where exactly they sit in the realm. And I can say, hey, you've got a spirits distiller who's about your size that's, 10% better than you. What is it that they're doing that we're not? And when you're able to challenge a site team or challenge yourselves into saying, okay, somebody else is doing it. It's not just a fanciful number that has been thrown out there by academia or an NGO. This is a real world installation that's out there that's achieving this. So I think that type of thing really does help drive that innovation. I mean, most of us are naturally competitive, at least a little. But again, I mean, having common industry talking the same, using the same measurements and the same metrics and being able to, anonymously compare, that helps drive results. I mean, you look at and Beer publicly posts that information. So that benchmarking is available. It's out on the Beer website for those who want to see it. I encourage you, if you're part of an industry association that's not doing something like that, ask them to do it.
That's great. Thank you. I would love to. We'll put the beer website up here for people to to check out. But definitely, it sounds like an important resource. So I think we talked a little bit about when this started, but would be great if you all could share a little bit about how that industry resources brought you together and how it all started and how others in the water sector could learn from this innovation and examples of doing this, like Andy just stated.
Well, back in like 15 years ago, Coke was just starting to look at how to measure water efficiency, how to compare ourselves. And as somebody pointed out, our shareholders were going, how do you compare to PepsiCo, and how do you compare to, the beer industry, and how do you compare to these other people? And so we started looking through public records, and many people were measuring water use, but reporting it in their filings or wherever with different measures. And I think the most unusual one I saw was somebody reported in gallons of water per dollar revenue per barrel of beer generated or something like that. It was so convoluted that there was no way you could back calculate it. So so Coke called together, called up Pepsi and Diageo and a couple other people. I think Anheuser-Busch was in there, and said, hey, we'd like to just talk about this. We met in Washington, D.C. for about a day and a half, talked about what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it and how we wanted to do it. And it started out just as talking about how you got those common metrics. And again, it's people like Andy and Eric and Michael and Guru who are technical people. We said we didn't want the VP of sustainability in the room. We wanted people who understood the numbers. And after 4 or 5 meetings, we said, well, we've kind of agreed on how we're going to measure it. So now that we measure it, what are we going to do? Are there some best practices to share? Are there ways that people are doing things? And it just kind of started morphing together. We met like every quarter. We started saying, let's do some best practices here. Let's start talking about greenhouse gases. And so we've kind of evolved over the years. We have working groups. It's just a roundtable. There's no real formal structure. We have a steering committee. I've retired, so it's kind of I kind of laid this child. It's 15 years old, so it gets to go out on its own and do its own thing. But it's been a journey to in many cases prove the value of this collaboration. And as Andy said, there's a biannual benchmarking. There's a lot of documents on best practices in both the greenhouse gas space, the replenish, the projects type space. This group collaborated to do a project in Mexico with members. So they've they've been innovative and creative in the way they've done things, and continue to press as we move forward.
Thank
I don't
you
know
for that.
if anyone. Andy's probably the older member of the group that's been involved.
I'll just
Yeah,
pile
I
on to
think-
the, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I was gonna
Yeah,
just pile on to the benefits too. And, so Andy was saying, we're all a little bit competitive by nature. And so it holds industries accountable amongst themselves. But, we also, particularly in my role in research and development, we fund academic research at early TRL levels, early technology readiness levels. And to have the biannual report from Beer is just tremendously valuable to say, if you want to develop a technology that really changes the world, here's some KPIs for you in terms of water intensity in different types of plants, greenhouse gas intensity in different types of plants. And it's very easy to do without having to go through a lot of contracts, NDAs, et cetera. It's here it is. If you want to change the world, here's some KPIs. So shout out to Paul for starting that. I don't know, 20 years ago, did you say? Quite a while ago. Yeah. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, I just going to pick up on the point that Paul made about best practice sharing, because again, part of this is we don't want this just to be, a few elite companies talking about, stuff that's at the very, leading edge. The whole intent about this is sharing that knowledge journey so that companies that are just getting started can feel like they can start to work on this. It truly is a never-ending journey, and that's, I think, part of the magic of Beer is that we have companies that are, more advanced or more mature in some respects than others, but it still allows us to all work together to share questions, ideas, practices. That really does allow, and in some cases, to do something a little bit different. And as Paul mentioned, the collaborative project that is being done in Mexico, really kicked off with some of our local teams, drawn out of a desire for us to do something tangible, something that was physically on the ground. And that's if you look it up, and maybe we can put a link, it's called Charco Bendito. But it is truly a collaborative local project designed to do real world restoration in a watershed, and not necessarily something that's been done by a group of competitive companies before. So sometimes you just need other people in the room who are coming at it from a different perspective to be able to force you outside of your own thinking a little bit. And that's, again, also the power of these collaborations.
Yeah,
Actually, I'd love for you to expand on that project a little bit, but Paul, please go ahead.
One thing I'll add, Guru mentioned about, all the we're not in there for pricing. I mean, this group, there's a huge antitrust statement that, we read at the beginning of the meetings, but the members are very cognizant of that. And when there have been times when we've said, well, let's talk about this issue, and like 6 hands go up and go, oh no, we're going to get into pricing, or we're going to get into sole sourcing, or we're going to get into another area, and that issue comes off the table. So the members themselves are very good at policing to make sure that we don't overstep those boundaries. Andy can talk more about that project.
Yeah, I mean, the desire that came out of a analysis that was done of simply looking at water risk, taking a look at the common water risk databases that are out there, like WRI's Aqueduct, and saying in areas where there is a moderate or high water stress or water risk, is there a particular watershed where there's a number of beer companies that are operating, and can we get our local teams together to talk about the ability to do something? And that came together, started 2 or 3 years ago with some of the local teams down in and around the Guadalajara region. We brought in a local NGO it was experienced in working in that area, which again, you talk about context. The local context is everything, and that includes making sure that the stakeholders that you engage, whether it's an NGO or the companies involved, that they're that they're located in that place and that they understand what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. And so this team coming together, identifying, the where, and then once they had the where, then really saying, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Yes, we want to make the watershed area better, but what does that mean? And that's where that NGO partnership came into play. And so restoration of physical area through reforestation. They're also doing water infrastructure access. So enhancing local water infrastructure so that local families can have drinking water. Education is also engaged in that. And again, it's being run by our local teams. I mean, I happen to know about it, but I'm not the one at the meetings. It's my team from Amatitan who is there. And, same with the others. And now it's grown that now it's expanding. And recently they've just had a couple of non-beer members also in the food and beverage space say, hey, this is something we want to be a part of. And that's how they start, is they start as a seed and they kind of continue to grow.
Yeah, Andy, I was just going to add, I think that's the proof of the success of the initiative, albeit it's young, is that I think it's just Mars that have just joined that. And, they're not a member of the beverage industry because they're not principally a beverage company. But so it's really exciting and that's probably where I started off with this collective action piece, how difficult it is. But you've got to build that trust, and through beer, the trust was built. And then there's now a dozen big global companies involved in what is at the moment quite a small project, but actually has huge potential. And for me, what's really exciting about this project is that every one of the members of that I speak to at a global level want to accelerate the scale and pace of achievements of it. And that's what's really exciting. Beyond, the small acorn that's there at the moment, I think there's a massive potential there. So yeah, it absolutely was built in the back of the trust of the Beverage Industry Environment Roundtable, and is more inclusive now. And that the point earlier made that we need to be inclusive of the different stakeholders in the water catchment and the different interests, and hopefully we can go to greater and better things through sort of scaling up and accelerating the progress there.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So we're getting close to the end here, but I do want to wrap us up with thoughts on the future. And we've talked a bit about reuse, and that reuse isn't happening yet back in the product, but that is a great opportunity. So would love to hear your thoughts on if that could ever happen and what would make it happen, either from a technology perspective or a policy and regulatory perspective. Anybody want to kick us off?
So I'll take that, Oriana. So I don't think from a regulatory, you'd force the issue. I think a lot of it has to do with the perception. And I'll just take a simple example, right? Let's say you had a floor that you had just cleaned, you had sanitized the floor or something, and somebody dropped something on the floor and picked it up and brought it to you to eat without you knowing that it had fallen on the floor. You'd eat it, you'd be perfectly fine, you wouldn't think anything of it. If somebody told you, hey, I brought you this cracker or, whatever, sandwich or whatever, and just by the way, I just want to let you know in spirit of full transparency that I dropped it, but I picked it up within the 5 seconds, I think, which is allowed. You'd be gun shy about eating it, right? No matter if I told you, hey, but the floor was just clean, 10 minutes ago, somebody sanitized it. I think a lot of it is with perception. We have to change that. I mean, when you think about, the astronauts up there in space, they reprocess urine and drink it again. And basically they've got over that yuck factor, which says, I'm not going to touch this because, and I think somebody mentioned that earlier, it's not about where it came from, it is how good it is, the water. And if we can change public perception, and maybe we all do it, right? So if somebody says, hey, do you realize Pepsi makes its beverage out of processed water? And then somebody else says, yeah, but so does Coke, so does Anheuser-Busch. So what's new? Tell me something else, right? Until we get to that level of perception and that level of acceptance by the general public at large, I think it's an uphill battle, because that will always be the differentiating factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how do we get there? You guys have any thoughts to that? Michael, Andy, Paul, Eric?
No, I've always said that the only way it's going to happen is if it happens in the United States first, not in a developing country. And we have we get the president of Pepsi and Coke and Diageo and Brown-Forman and Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors and all of them together. And we put product on the table and says, all these products were made with recycled water, and the presidents and CEOs pick them up and drink them. That's a start. But until you have that, we're all doing it, like Guru said, there's always going to be somebody in marketing that wants to point at somebody else.
Yeah, I remember watching this TV show once. It was a long time ago. Jay Leno and Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates has done some work with reprocessing urine. I mean, he's set up this, or he's collaborated with some technical partners that reprocess urine. And I remember Jay Leno, Bill Gates. Jay Leno is interviewing Bill Gates. On the table is 2 bottles of water, and Bill Gates is talking about it. He's saying, you know, this water is good enough to drink. And Leno offers him. He says, "Would you drink 1 bottle?" And Gates says yes, and he says, "I'll drink 1 if you drink the other one." And Leno asks him, he says, "You know, do you know which is which?" And Bill Gates says, "Maybe I do, but maybe I don't." So Leno says, "Okay, I'll pick the bottle." So he picks the bottle, gives it to Bill Gates, tells him, "Drink it." Bill Gates gulps it down. And both of them were, well, at least Leno thought one of them was made out of reprocessed urine and one was not. So when Bill Gates gulps one down, now he tells Leno, "Now you got to drink the other one, right?" And Leno drinks that, and Gates tells him, "Did you feel anything different?" He said, "No, but can you tell me now which is which?" And Gates told him both were made out of urine.
That's right.
And it's great, right? When you listen to this stuff on the TV, and you know, people like that, and Gates is at the top of the corporate world, and Leno is top in his own right, and you know, you need to have. I agree with Paul. You have that kind of messaging from senior leaders. You know, how about Biden drinking something like that? You know, it goes a long way.
It's all one water. We're already drinking it.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of getting people to understand that.
Right.
Michael, Andy, last thoughts.
I was just going to, I know we're tight for time, and I think water reuse is hugely important here in terms of operational improvements, and absolutely has to be a focus in technology and product use of that. But I think the bigger picture here in terms of climate change and the water crisis is really important for us to recognize as well. What's outside our 4 walls, what we can't control. And you know, in the week before COP26 and the talk of the climate crisis is a water crisis, is a nature crisis, and water, the impact of the climate on many countries and communities is around water in terms of the climate crisis. And I mentioned it earlier in terms of adaptation to climate impact. So I think, you know, the biggest challenge that we as beverage industry, or heavy water users, if you like, heavy water users to make profit for our shareholders and for our employees and others, is that we are very held responsible for the impact that, you know, our heavy use of water has on catchments, and that we address that. And sometimes it's a very positive way in which we can address that. Sometimes it's very challenging because there's not the forum to do it, vis-a-vis my earlier concern about collective action and really working together. And Beverage Industry Roundtable we've discussed is a great example of where it has been a success, and we need more of that. But I think that climate risk perspective from an operational point of view, from a reputational license to operate point of view, is hugely important to many users, heavy users of water, and we should make sure we're addressing that as much as we're addressing the water reuse issue.
Thank you. Yeah. Andy, final thoughts.
I don't know that much more can be said. I mean, to Michael's point, I mean, water is everything. I mean, you hear that tagline where people say water is life, but it's necessary for everything that we do. And so as organizations start to value it more, as the investor community starts to look at risk more and starts to put financial value on risk and risk mitigation and adaptation, that's where that traction will also start to come. And we also can't forget about municipalities. I mean, again, this goes back to what can people do is engage in your local politics. And sometimes it's painful, and they say, well, you know, we got a proposal to raise taxes because we need to replace our water infrastructure, our sewer infrastructure. And everybody hates paying for that. I mean, it's terrible, but you need that infrastructure. We all need that infrastructure, and we need to invest in it. And so we have to make sure that we are making those hard choices when they come our way. Let's invest in infrastructure.
Absolutely. Eric, any final thoughts?
Tough to build on all that. I mean, I will say that, I think the question gets less meaningful as we get lower and lower water usage ratios. And so in the meantime, I think that's what we can all do is work with technologists and technology and drive that usage ratio until perhaps the question becomes irrelevant, because it will be a long journey. If you just look at the direct or indirect potable reuse in California, where you are, Oriana, what is it, 20 years that the discussion has been happening. So it's not going to be easy, but it doesn't mean we can't do anything in the meantime.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you all again for your participation and taking the time out of your day to talk through some of these challenges with us. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for your great questions coming in through the chat. Anything that we weren't able to ask directly, we'll circulate out via an email to everybody who was registered. And looking forward to second panel where we can address some of the technologies that might help solve some of these issues in the future. All right, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.